We are stationed in Indianapolis, Indiana today. I'll be on the air once again to start the Combine coverage on the NFL Network, on-field drills coverage at 9 a.m. Eastern Time on Friday, and a man who knows so much about all of these kids, college kids no more, getting set to take the next step into the next level of the National Football League. College football sideline reporter for Fox Sports and writer for Sports Illustrated, who wrote a great piece about 10 freaky athletic kids you might not know are going to jump out of the building this week. He is Bruce Feldman. How are you, Bruce?
I'm doing great, Rich. My favorite time of the year seems to be Combine time.
Is that right? Well, I mean, it's interesting because now you're watching kids that you have learned about and covered quite a bit at the collegiate level go to the next step. Seeing kids that succeed at the next level, is there, based on your reporting and seeing and experience, that you think the makeup-wise, knowing can succeed at the next level? Is there a formula from what you've seen firsthand?
I don't think there is beyond this one big thing. And this goes back to, writing a recruiting book and spending a year inside a college football program a decade plus ago was you better have somebody who loves football, because ultimately, that's to me the biggest thing. If you have somebody who has all the talent in the world and is one of those combine freak guys, but they just either aren't really competitive or aren't really tough, as you well know, I mean, it's such a grind that the margin between your athleticism and everybody else's is nowhere near what it is in the college game. And the college game with its wider hash marks, that kind of can help create that. I mean, sometimes you're out there against walk-ons and kids who, probably wouldn't be playing unless, maybe it was an injury or whatever. So you better have somebody who really loves it and is really tough. I think those are, to me, the biggest factors. But just, talking about how far they've come, I remember I did a quarterback book, 4 years ago, and I remember seeing Josh Rosen as a junior in high school, and he was a fantastic talent then, but you would see a little bit of the maybe no filter kind of stream of consciousness, how he would respond to stuff. But at the same token, he was, 16 years old. I'm not sure I don't think I would have handled things that well if somebody put a microphone in front of me and made me think I was great when I was 16 years old and how I would respond.
Well, but that was going to be my next question, so you led me right to it, because when you talk about love of football and wondering if it is there, based on the talent level that you have seen and how that those might not be easily combined based on how great he looks on the field and how poor, apparently, he has an attitude towards loving football. Josh Rosen is the biggest conundrum I've seen in quite some time. And you had a great tweet this week that I quoted on the show just the other day about his toughness. Why do you think Rosen still has this stigma about him? Do you think it is accurate coming into this combine?
I don't think it's really accurate. I don't. Now, I think there's a separation between what durability is and toughness, because you can have plenty of guys who are, super tough, but at the same time, for whatever reason, and Josh Rosen did not play with anywhere near the kind of talent that Sam Darnold had, and he took a pounding. But I go back to talking, in season, I work for Fox and I do college football games, and we talk to a lot of coordinators, and I remember talking to coordinators, especially one who was like, we blitzed him 46 times. We did not think he was going to be very tough. And by midway through the game, we're like, this, dude is really tough. He was lighting us up. He kept getting back up, and we were going after him. And, I think part of the thing with him is he comes from a really, really well-off family. His on the mom's side is from like the Wharton Business School. Not that you went there, that's the, the foundation of the family, 100, 200 years ago. So there's that. There's also the idea he was a competitive tennis player, and he was an elite tennis player who, that was what he was doing when he was, preteen until he was about 13. So when we think of tennis, even though, Drew Brees was a really good tennis player, at one point when he was younger, we don't think of those guys as tough guys. And I do think some of the stuff, like I said, some of the non-filter things where he's popped off and said some things that are maybe are big picture things where you don't expect a college kid to be wading into those. So I think he can be a little bit misunderstood. I think the challenge is going to be, how does he come across in these, little 15-minute speed dating sit-downs with the quarterback coaches that he's going to get with, and who's comfortable with him, because his talent is fantastic. And I think that, that'll probably be overblown because so many people are just going to wade in and go, oh, I think I know what this kid's about. And I think, it's kind of a moving target a little bit.
Bruce Feldman, on whose podcast I appeared this week, the Audible, joining me here on the Rich Eisen Show, and I do want to talk with you about that in a second. Your Sports Illustrated, your SI.com article, let's unpack it a little bit here. Who should I be looking out for, folks be looking out for this weekend that we're not talking about that are going to shine up and show up and shine out?
Well, one of them is Leighton Vander Esch. He was a former walk-on, a zero-star recruit who was a good basketball player and a quarterback in high school from Idaho. He really blossomed on the field this past season. He was a dominant player in the bowl game, and he made a ton of tackles. I'm told, don't be surprised if he's jumping close, upper 30s, maybe even 40-inch vertical. I mean, he's that kind of athlete. He's had to get physically stronger because, like I said, he was a developmental guy who, has been a high school quarterback. But he's one I think will really shine. Obviously, Saquon Barkley is a ridiculous athlete. I mean, I think but people know about him. People know about Vita Vea, who's could be Dontari Poe-esque in what he does at the combine, but I think he's a much better player. In our season, we had Ohio State, we had Michigan, we had a bunch of really good teams, Oklahoma. Vita Vea was by far the most impressive defensive player we saw this season, on the field. He throws guys around. He is an absolute beast. I mean, those guys. An off-the-radar guy, Jannard Avery is a linebacker from Memphis, high school power lifter. I think he will really test really well. I don't think he'll test, blow people away and end up rising up into the first or second round. But I would put him in that category of a guy who I think is really going to wow people. And then a tight end, Mike Gesicki. He doesn't block great, but he's a former volleyball player.
Man, he was great. I agree.
He may jump 40 inches. He may jump 11 feet broad jump. I mean, he's going to do some ridiculous things athletically. And I think, he's not, like I said, he's not a great blocking tight end, but he is a stretch the field guy. And anybody who watched the Big Ten knows he was a big factor for that offense getting downfield.
Yeah, it's kind of been difficult for me talking up Penn State guys as much as I have with Saquon Barkley and this kid Gesicki, but he was terrific. I mean, he could high point like anybody else, and we're going to see the tight ends out there on the field with the quarterback Saturday on the NFL Network, and it does start off with Barkley in the running back group on Friday. And in that podcast that I did with you, which I really enjoyed doing, by the way, the Audible, you also touched on how the college basketball scandal could eventually touch upon college football. Would you mind telling me and the listeners here how you think that might actually play out?
Yeah, I just think the added scrutiny of there's so much more attention on it. I think the difference with college basketball is you have these, street agents who are connected to actual agents. And because there's less of a developmental piece in this. A 5-star guy in college basketball is probably going to be, a lottery pick caliber guy, whereas you have 5-star guys, for instance, the year Rosen and Darnold were coming out of high school for a while, the number one ranked overall player in all of college football recruiting was a guy named Ricky Town. He's been to 4 or 5 schools. The point being, it's way more speculative. But having said all that, talking to coaches, I talked to a coach who spent a long time in the SEC, and he said, it's dirtier now than it was 10, 15 years ago. What you have happen, though, is you have a lot of people where they're boosters. They might not even be big boosters, but the players are way more accessible now when they're recruits because of social media. You can DM them. You see who, anybody who follows your favorite team, you follow the tight ends coach. You know who they are recruiting because you see who they're kind of following, and then all of a sudden it's like those kids are out there, they're commodities, and all these people want to feel like they're invested in the program, and so they feel like everybody's doing it, which I think you see the example of college basketball where it feels like all these big programs, everybody is kind of tainted, and so I think that's the part where it spreads out, and I think it scares a lot of people. Who is talking to who? And I think the question is it plausible deniability when it comes to the actual head coach or people on down of how dirty it really is.
Well, I mean, and part of the conversation that I'm hearing based off of, again, the college basketball scandal that's playing out in real time with football is that the one and done in college basketball that is front and center in the conversation has put into the spotlight the fact that kids have to play 3 years after their high school graduation to be eligible for the draft and obviously the combine that's going on this weekend, and how that might be something that should be revisited by the NFL, which says the reason why it's there is because kids might not be ready to compete with grown-ass men that go down in the National Football League, 30-year-old guys that'll take your head off because you think that they think that you're taking food off of your table, off of their table. Where do you stand on that subject, Bruce?
I think we were talking about the 1% of 1%. Now, it's not to say kids wouldn't think. There's a lot of kids whose heads are so out of whack from the recruiting process that they think, and some of them, physically look kind of like they would be NFL players. I go back to. They have this event called the Opening every year. Nike brings in the top 180 rated, high school recruits who are going to be seniors, and it's on the Nike campus and in Portland. And you'll see a lot of NFL players around, like Aaron Rodgers showed up at the, Desmond comes out there. A lot of guys, who are Nike guys come in. And there was a player who was ended up as the number one ranked guy in that particular class and was a defensive lineman from Florida who ended up going to Auburn. And I thought, and me and a couple other people, including some guys who were like former NFL players, they thought he was an NFL player walking around. I mean, he looked the part. He'd been in a weight room probably from the time he was in 8th grade. That he wasn't. If he had been one of those guys who'd been like, oh, I'll be a sub-package guy and I'll do well in the NFL, I mean, he's been kind of a bust. But physically, he looks the part. And everybody was telling him how great he was. I mean, you have guys like this who physically look the part, but just mentally, can they handle, it's a full-time job with grown-ups and you're trying to take their money. That's why almost none of them, I think, could handle it. And I'm not saying they couldn't stay around, but they would need to be coddled in ways that I just don't think, the NFL wants to deal with that. Maybe after 2 years, you may have a handful of guys who could handle it, but the direct, one and out, I mean, we're talking about a fraction of 1% that I think are like legit big time college football players. It's just not realistic.
Yeah, I'm just even thinking right now who in college football that's not eligible would be able to be in this combine right now. I mean, could you throw that out there?
There's a couple of guys. There's a guy at Clemson, Dexter Lawrence, who's 6'5", 340. He's the same year as Rashawn Gary. And I know that, people from the time who recruited him said he is going to be a top 10 pick 3 years from now. He is a freaky athlete. He's a pretty mature kid. He's pretty grounded. I think if he was happened to be out at this point, even last year, I think he would have been probably a first 3 rounds pick. Now, there would have been big question marks, but I mean, he is rare. I mean, you take a guy like Ed Oliver, who dominated college football as a true freshman at Houston, different level, it's a group of 5 program. He's a 6'1", 285-pound, super explosive kid who's kind of in the mold of Aaron Donald. I don't know what would have been. I'd be curious to ask, your Daniel Jeremiah or Bucky or one of those guys or Mayock, what they would have think if somehow Ed Oliver at 19 could have come out, what the NFL would have thought of him, because he is a super explosive kid with a lot of gifts, and maybe the Aaron Donald model would have intrigued them. But he is such a rare exception to what I'm talking about. All the other 4- and 5-star guys, never mind all the thousands of kids who sign, on signing day to go to play major college football.
Yeah, I don't know if that topic of discussion is going to come up during the combine coverage on the NFL Network this weekend. That's why I'm doing it. That's why I'm doing it here with you. Thanks for having me on your podcast, and as always, calling into the show, brother.
Thanks for having me. All right, good talking to you, Rich.
You got it. It's Bruce Feldman of SI.com.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.